Well, as you might know, the vice president was in town on Saturday, and so was Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, and so was the Secret Service. And that's where things start to get a little bit, interesting. This is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more. Now, maybe a little bit of background is in order. I'm the news director here at Hot News Talk Radio, which normally is, that's not really worth noting when it comes to Digital Drive. But in this case, it almost kind of is. You see, what happens is here on Digital Drive, we talk about technology a lot more and other things too. So it's sort of a wide range of things. And on the 5 o'clock news, which is what I'm the director of, we talk about, it's pretty well scripted actually. It's really set in its ways. It's the news and the weather and the traffic. And I like delivering it that way. And there's a set way of doing it, and I do it the way that I think is best, and it tends to work out pretty well. So what does that have to do with the vice president? Well, what happened was the VP was coming into town, and so was Ash Carter, and I was searching for a bunch of different, sources on what information I could get about the VP coming in and Ash Carter, and all, tons of different things were happening all at the same time with that memorial service going on. Most of what I was searching for actually was just like traffic information, honestly, which of course Mike Wood does an excellent job of delivering. Mike Wood is the traffic director, I guess. He's in our traffic center here at Hot News Talk Radio, and he does a whole heck of a lot of good work for us, and we're extremely grateful for all that he does. And he brought something to my attention that I thought was very, very interesting. There's almost a communications blackout, it seems, when the vice president comes into town, or anyone who's under the protection of the Secret Service. Now, you may be familiar with TDOT. Now, TDOT is the Tennessee Department of Transportation. TDOT also has something called the SmartWay cameras, and it's sort of like their trademark special thing that TDOT does. GDOT, of course, I live in Georgia, so I'm more used to GDOT than I am to TDOT, but GDOT is the same thing, and it has different traffic cameras you can monitor as well. Interestingly enough, though, TDOT seems to do almost a better job than GDOT does, maybe because Tennessee has more metropolitan areas than Georgia does. I'm not sure how that works, because in Georgia we have Atlanta and we have Savannah, and those are our metropolitan areas basically. And in Tennessee, of course, you have Nashville, you have Knoxville, and you have Chattanooga. So you have three main metropolitan areas, and overall TDOT does quite a good job. Well, getting back to the SmartWay cameras, they're a very useful resource for those of us who are in the news business, because we can see traffic, we can see the flow, we can see if there's an accident. Especially if we hear that there's been a horrible wreck somewhere, then we can look on the traffic cameras and see what the condition is of the roadways and see the different responders, so we can update you on who's there. So the SmartWay cameras are an extremely useful resource for those of us in the news industry, and I'm sure Mike Wood could tell you all about that. Well, something interesting happened when the vice president came into town on Saturday, which was there was a complete blackout of the TDOT SmartWay cameras, as in you could not see them. You couldn't access them. And that's by order of the Department of Transportation. I assume you're receiving orders from the Secret Service. And there's a whole long story you could get into with the Secret Service, how it came to be, how it originally was formed to combat counterfeiting, and all sorts of interesting things. That's for another show, perhaps centered on history rather than talking about traffic and other such things. Well, something else that was called to my attention during the vice president's visit, and again, I'm not really going to say anything at all about the vice president himself or the speech he made, because that's not really my deal, right? I mean, you can determine that for yourself, what to think of the speech that the VP made. A lot of people were very impressed with it. I thought it was very well scripted, I'll put it that way. But, other than that, it was just, it was a speech that he gave. But something that was called to my attention from a good friend of mine on Facebook is there was apparently an IMSI catcher downtown. Now, IMSI, it's very hard to say, IMSI. It stands for International Mobile Subscriber Identification. Now, an IMSI is a unique identifier that your phone puts out. Generally, it's coded to the SIM card, I think, and sometimes it's coded to the phone as well. It gets kind of wonky, but the IMSI number is what's broadcast out by your phone. It's your unique identifier on your cell phone, and everyone has one, whether you have a smartphone or a dumb phone. If you have a mobile communications device that's used for telecommunications, you have an IMSI number. There's also IMEI, And there's also there's another unique identifier, and I can never remember the name of it. Basically, you have two machine addresses that are linked to your phone, and you can't change them. It is your address on your phone. Now, what an IMSI catcher does is it takes that information that your phone is broadcasting and then reinterprets it for a human reader or a machine reader in order to determine what you're saying, essentially. So the motive for putting an IMSI catcher downtown while both the Secretary of Defense and the Vice President are in town is pretty obvious. In case some crazed don't tread on me lunatic from Chattanooga decides to shoot at the VP, we need to see what his phone traffic is like, right? I mean, that's the obvious answer to that. That's the obvious reason why there would be an IMSI catcher downtown. There's a problem with that, though, in that it's kind of illegal. Now, bulk metadata collection has been ruled to be illegal already by a federal appeals court. So it's already, it is illegal blanketly. It's just a crime to use an IMSI catcher, basically. The other problem is it's not just illegal by statute or by decision. It's also illegal constitutionally. It's not like this is a gray area. It's actually very plain. The question that should be asked is, do you have a warrant to search my phone? Because your phone is your property, right? I mean, you use your phone every single day, right? I mean, I certainly do. And I receive texts, I receive calls, I receive lots of texts and calls actually for work. And I use it for mobile data when I'm out on the go and all sorts of different things. Basically, my job is never over. So I have to use my phone quite a lot. And I'm sure you do as well. Well, what if somebody just decided to set up a catcher device, say in your office, and your boss decided to catch all your information while you're at the office? You would frown at that, right? Or what if your neighborhood, your homeowners association decided to do the same thing? You would probably be kind of annoyed, right? But for some reason, when the feds do it, it's okay? Not really, and I don't think that you think that, but that's maybe a line of argument you could use on one of your statist friends who somehow thinks it's okay to spy on people's cell phones so long as it's for the protection of some high up somewhere. Of course, I'll remind you of the Fourth Amendment, which, again, I'm sure you already know. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, note that, but upon probable cause, supported, I should say, by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, that's very, very specific, right? That's extremely specific. You cannot get more specific than that. It's so specific that it's almost a hindrance to the investigator, and that's a good thing, because then that means that there can't be a search or seizure that's unreasonable. This is a protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Basically, it's a denied power to the government saying you cannot unreasonably search or seize somebody else's property, an individual's property, a sovereign citizen or resident of the United States property. Pretty simple. Well, the problem is somehow that does not apply to phones and to computers or cars or your person during a pat down or anything, and it doesn't really make any sense at all. Caller, you're on the air. What's up?
I love the subject. I want to make two observations. First of all, I think you talked about it on the air one time, is that there are people out there believe, and lawyers believe, that you can sign away your rights. That when you sign a user agreement, you're really signing away your rights to privacy too. You cannot sign away a constitutional right by contract. And other than that, do you think anybody that wanted to attack a government official would use a phone, or are they going to use a CB radio or a ham radio? Or better yet, maybe communicate with Morse code? There's no possible way any agency can cover every single form of communications. Are they going to go low level and just pick up a couple of walkie-talkies? Do you think they're going to communicate on the phone that they know is being tracked and tapped?
Right. I mean,
we know that the purpose of this is just to spy on Americans, to scare them into allowing them to spy. And I want to hear your comment on the air. Thanks.
Sure. No problem. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for your call. The problem too is, and that's a very excellent point, is that if somebody were to plot a assassination on the VP, it seems a little bit doubtful that they would be posting on their phone about that. I mean, somebody who is, I don't know if I want to say smart enough, but somebody who is at least slightly tech savvy will know that your phone is being tracked. I mean, even the layman knows that. You know that. I know that. Everybody knows that their phone's being tracked. This is very simple stuff. You know, it's sort of an assumption that you have when you're using your phone. My phone is being tracked. Simple enough. Well, so then if you're going to plot an assassination against, or even murder somebody, why would you post about that with your phone? That's the dumbest thing you can do. So any sort of slightly intelligent plot would have individuals who would not post about it on their phone. Pretty simple stuff. I think too about Oswald, back when JFK was assassinated back in the 1960s, back in ancient history and in rural medieval America. Back in those days, Lee Harvey Oswald didn't really tell anybody what he was going to do. I mean, it's not like he went to the bar and said, "Hey guys, I'm gonna shoot the president tomorrow and probably the governor of Texas as well." I'm just thinking about it. Well, anyway, see ya. Lee Harvey Oswald didn't really do that. And no person in their right mind would. Now, say what you will about the sanity of Lee Harvey Oswald. Say what you will about the assassination attempt against JFK. Nevertheless, the official story, of course, is that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and he fired one magic bullet that managed to bounce off of several objects and hit the president and hit the governor as well, and it burst the president's head from an improbable angle and all sorts of different things. But say what you will, Lee Harvey Oswald did not really tell anybody about his plot to assassinate the president. I think even farther back than that, in the 1860s, when John Wilkes Booth and his co-conspirators assassinated Lincoln. JFK, or not, pardon, not JFK. John Wilkes Booth didn't really go around telling people how he was going to shoot the president. He didn't broadcast that to the world. He is a famous actor. This guy's an extremely famous actor. That's like if Johnny Depp just shot Obama. That would be kind of nuts. That'd be sort of nuts. They're crazy, right? Well, that's sort of what happened with John Wilkes Booth. This is a very famous actor who shot the president in the back of the head, jumped off the stage, sic semper tyrannis, and ran off. Kind of weird stuff, but he didn't go broadcasting that to everybody. Now, yeah, you might get your lone crazy or somebody who posts on Twitter, boy, I'm sure mad about the VP, I could just kill him, and then you run into problems with that. But people are not going to broadcast their intent. It's so obvious that this is just an excuse to spy on people's cell phones. It's almost laughable. If anything, this is probably a demographic survey to see what people are posting like in the Chattanooga area. It's an excuse to move an IMSI catcher into the area. Even more so, it's not like this is new, because the federal marshals have access to IMSI catchers or cell site simulators provided by our good buddies over at the Harris Corporation, and they can use these and probably have, although we can't prove that, of course. They probably have used cell site simulators in our area at least on a few occasions in order to catch several fugitives. And by the way, they won't comment on how these people are caught, by the way. If you ask them, they say, well, we can't comment on how these people were caught. We can just comment that they were, and we can also comment that we did an excellent job as law enforcement, and you should worship us, and you should bow down to us, because after all, we are law enforcement. And it gets to be kind of annoying, actually, but that's another thing you have to deal with in America. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks, guys. Got to deal with your nonsense. It gets to be kind of annoying, though, that people will constantly run sort of apologetics, like governmental apologetics. Like, we're all used to Christian apologetics, Muslim apologetics, rabbinic apologetics, all sorts of different apologetics. So now there's government apologetics, where there are people trying to come up with excuses as to why we need the state. And it starts to get kind of obnoxious, because there's all these different reasons to not, and you can point to all these different reasons like why the state is a bad thing, and then somebody will just say, well, it's not the perfect system, but it's the best one that we can have. And that just drives me nuts, man. Because think about it. We have a state that fully endorses torturing people who are only suspected of being terrorists, and we only go for that because they're foreigners, right? I mean, if it was an American who was kidnapped and waterboarded and force-fed and tortured in all sorts of horrific ways only for being suspected of committing a crime, then we would be all up in arms. But because it's a foreigner, it's okay, and the government fully endorses that. You have what happened in Abu Ghraib. The government fully endorses that. You have two ridiculous wars. The government endorses, actually more than two ridiculous wars. Government fully endorses that. The state is cool with that. The state takes more money than it could possibly ever use on projects that nobody's approved of, and that's somehow okay too. All these different things that the state does, and people are just fine with it, and they say, well, you know what, it's a bad system, but it's the best one we can have. And if you don't like it, you can leave. Well, actually, no, you can't. It's a funny thing, because trying to leave the United States is a very difficult thing. It's almost as if we live in a prison state, where trying to live is almost as hard as trying to get in, or trying to leave, I should say, is almost as difficult as trying to get in. Because once you try to leave, legally anyway, there's all sorts of taxes that the IRS will charge you with. In fact, if you live outside of the United States and you're making money and you're still a sovereign U.S. citizen or what have you, the IRS will tax you on that money that you've made overseas as if you made it in the state of whatever state you're in. If you have a state income tax, that piles up too. So all sorts of reasons why this is kind of awful. And it's not like this is a unique situation where the United States is uniquely awful. No, I mean, every state is going to be kind of terrible because that's how states are. But acting like this is just the best solution ever is kind of silly, actually. And constantly offering up different apologetics for why this is cool, and if you don't like it, you should leave, doesn't really make any sense at all. Because after all, think about Thomas Jefferson and all the different revolutionaries. They didn't just leave because they didn't like it. They tried to change things. So that's much more laudable than saying, well, you should just leave, because that's kind of the lazy way out. Leaving is a lazy way out. No, actually, the brave way to do it is to try to change things, and maybe that's the best solution. Because people say all the time, and I hate it so much, if you don't like it, well, you can just leave. Well, what if I'm trying to fix it, Like, what if I'm trying to actually change the country in a way in which I like, Maybe that's what I'm trying to do. And unfortunately, people don't really smile upon that viewpoint because they're lazy. People are generally, I should say, kind of lazy, and they don't really want change in any sort of proactive manner. And that's true of everyone. I'm that way too, right? I mean, I don't want to get engaged in a whole revolutionary cause and all this nonsense. I don't want to do that. I want to hang out in my house and watch Netflix all day. And partially that's by design. But it's kind of, on the other hand, there are very massive problems that we have here, and trying to ignore them and saying, if you don't like it, you should just leave, is the lazy way out. And it's certainly not how the founding fathers would have done it. I can assure you of that. Well, Senator Dianne Feinstein has raised some concerns that are interesting. She, of course, if you're not familiar with Senator Dianne Feinstein, she's been a strong proponent for the Brady campaign, which is one of the more outspoken, I guess we'll say, or anti-gun organizations that we have here in the United States. The Brady campaign, of course, was founded after James Brady was shot and paralyzed from the neck down during the attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan back in the 80s. And after that, the Brady campaign was founded and by James Brady's wife in order to combat gun violence. And it's officially, the name is like the Brady Campaign to Combat Gun Violence or something along those lines. It's kind of like MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It does a lot of lobbying, and a lot of laws were passed on the behest of the Brady campaign, and it's really kind of obnoxious. But Dianne Feinstein was a personal friend of the Brady family, and she's been a outspoken advocate for gun control over the last few years. She's also, interestingly enough, fully involved in the whole surveillance apparatus. If you're familiar with the FISA courts, partially designed by Feinstein. If you're familiar with the whole surveillance system that we have, she's one of the biggest apologists for the NSA system ever, is Dianne Feinstein. And, whether you're in support of that or not, there's no denying that Dianne Feinstein is very, very much a strong supporter of the whole surveillance state idea. Well, now Feinstein is concerned in a way which I think is kind of funny, actually. Dianne Feinstein is worried that net neutrality might help the terrorists. What? It's, if you are trying to make an argument, just throw in the word terrorists and you can pretty much get whatever you want done. Okay, for instance, I'm sick of government intervention in a lot of different things. So I should, my angle is all wrong. Instead of trying to come up with an intellectual reason why things shouldn't be the way they are, I should just say things shouldn't be the way they are because terrorists could exploit that to kill people. That should have been my angle the whole time. Never mind the whole anarcho-capitalist stuff. I should have just said terrorism the whole time, and I probably would have gotten a lot more done. Darn, I wish I'd thought of that. Well, see, that's kind of what happens with surveillance is, well, if we don't monitor this or that, then terrorists might exploit it to kill people. Or rather, suspected terrorists might use it to kill people. We can't actually prove anything, so we're going to torture them anyway, is generally the idea. So it's, for some reason, people who are foreign don't have as many rights as citizens. How does that work, right? It's ridiculous. Rights come from God unless you're not a citizen, in which case they don't. Silly. But anyway, it gets to the point where you just want to pull your hair out of the whole terrorism angle. But anyway, like I say, Dianne Feinstein is now a strong proponent, or anti-proponent, I guess, for the net neutrality, which is kind of weird because net neutrality has sort of been the Democratic baby for a while now. In a remarkable feat, though, internet providers have apparently succeeded in making the net neutrality fight about terrorism. Yeah. A newly published letter that's been delivered to the FCC in May, Dianne Feinstein, who's a Democrat from California, has raised concerns that the new net neutrality rules might be used to shield terrorists. Yeah, In particular, she was worried, or concerned anyway, that Yohar Sonayev had studied bomb-making materials on the internet, specifically from online copies of AQAP's Inspire magazine. Yeah, it's not hard to find out how to make bombs, by the way. You know, look up the Anarchist Cookbook, and it ain't that hard. And half the stuff in the Anarchist Cookbook, by the way, is misinformation. This is Digital Drive. We're going to talk more about this in just a few seconds right here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, and hotnewstalkradio.com. Also on the TuneIn Radio app for your smartphone.
This is a mob world. This is the modern world. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing of myself.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Sky Aerial Services uses advanced drone technology to give you a better perspective and depth of your property and project. We offer aerial photography and video for your business, farm, home, or advertising campaigns, as well as editing services to complete the experience. Call us at 423-521-0284 and see how we can help you tell your story about your business, property, or project. We work with real estate professionals, both commercial and residential, developers, engineer inspectors, surveyors, ad agencies, auto and boat dealers, mapping services, insurance inspectors, corporate marketing, charity events, weddings, and photographers. Our consultation is free. Call 423-521-0284. That's 423-521-0284, or visit our website, skyaerialservices.com. Sky Aerial Services. The sky is our limit.
Talk 1240.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Saudi Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection: loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Saudi, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Do you feel better outside your home or business than in? Indoor air quality is important. Mildew, mold, smoke, water, and rodent damage are prime causes of poor indoor air quality. Ducts, Indoor Air Professionals, better known as Duct Busters, cleans HVAC systems using 127 definable Duct Busters steps. Let Mark Thompson address the indoor air quality at your business to help reduce employee illnesses. Prevent fires by cleaning your dryer vents. Mark and his parents, Dick and Joan Thompson, have been building our local economy and helping local people with HVAC systems 16 years. Ducts, Indoor Air Professionals. Call 876-9907. 876-9907. Ducks. Call now.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, I'm David Tulis, inviting you to make the move with me 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays here at AM 1240.
Fox News Radio, I'm Pat O'Neill. He's moved up in the latest polls. Ohio Governor and GOP presidential candidate John Kasich has now picked up a key endorsement in the South from Alabama Governor Robert Bentley.
Like these men and women that you see here in this place, he's a champion. And he's a great man to lead our country.
Bentley making the announcement at the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame. In Thailand, a bomb blast has rocked a Bangkok intersection near a popular shrine, killing at least a dozen.
That may give us some clue as to who might be behind this. There have been a number of blasts directed, particularly at Buddhist monks, over the last 6 months by Islamist separatists from southern Thailand.
Sam Kiley of Sky News. A relatively small earthquake with a magnitude of 4.0 north of Piedmont, California, near Berkeley. The quake was felt in downtown San Francisco, but no damage reported. Fox News, big report, you decide.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Jello Biafra of the Dead Kennedys famously described Dianne Feinstein as a dragon lady with no heart. And, that cough was intentional because he did not say, there's a bit of a word in between no and heart, and not radio safe, we'll put it that way. And he also described her as a banker, and he also described her as Margaret Thatcher. Very interesting. I'm not a fan of bankers. I don't like Margaret Thatcher, and I certainly am not a fan of dragon ladies either. And I like people who have hearts. So I guess I don't like Dianne Feinstein. And I guess Jello Biafra didn't either. I always kind of took him for a bit of a Democrat himself. But hey, who would have figured it out? Well, anyway, Dianne Feinstein is now worried that net neutrality might help the terrorists. And I'm not sure how she figures that, actually, because now she's saying that, maybe we should censor the internet just in case, because terrorists might use information that's on the net in order to terrorists could use the internet, basically, is what I'm trying to say, right? I mean, I can't think of a reason why, but terrorists could certainly use the internet. But guess what? So could the rest of us. Oh boy, the rest of everybody could actually use the internet. What a shock. Well, anyway, in a rather remarkable feat, internet providers have apparently actually succeeded in making the net neutrality fight about terrorism. In a newly published letter that was delivered to the Federal Communications Commission back in May, Senator Dianne Feinstein, according to The Verge, raised concerns that the new net neutrality rules might actually be used to shield terrorists. In particular, Feinstein was concerned that Yohar Tsarnaev may have studied bomb-making materials on the internet, specifically online copies of AQAP's Inspire magazine, and that many broadband providers had complained to her that net neutrality rules would prevent them from honoring any orders to block that content. Yeah, but what about freedom of speech? I mean, you can read Inspire magazine. I have read Inspire magazine. It's really weird, but I mean, you can do that. See, that's the thing. Radical Islam can talk just like anyone else can, right? I mean, radical Islam has a freedom to be out there just like any other ideology, because that's kind of the beauty of America in and of itself. Now, I don't like that, but that's how it is, because how can you label an entire ideology as wrong, or not wrong necessarily, but not protected under free speech, because it kind of is. And that's the bizarre thing about it, but that's the freedom part about it too. Well, in a rather odd move, I might actually be defending the freedom of speech of actually everyone. Who would have thought? Caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Yeah, Dianne Feinstein, Russell, did not have an epiphany. She is a hardcore Marxist. She's the enemy of America. She'd probably be in prison for treason, and this was done purposefully.
Oh yeah.
Once you control it, you crush it. So her idea was to take control over it, throw out the word, terrorism, and then shut down sites like ours. We're a site that deals with individual liberty. I know you guys do, and other sites that promote freedom of choice, to keep and bear arms and individual liberty. That's what she's about. She is a hardcore Marxist, and all Marxists lie. Most Democrats lie. All socialists lie. And to be quite honest with you, they all need to be in prison. So thanks. Bye.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that's a good point too, is that this is not just about terrorism. It's going to use that as an excuse, but it's not actually about terrorism. That's something that has to be made expressly clear, is that this is not actually about terrorism. It's about controlling of speech. It's so obvious, but nobody really seems to get on that narrative. And that's the obnoxious thing, is whatever narrative they say it's about is what the media is going to push it as being about. Well, some of the media anyway, not us obviously, but some of the media is going to use that as the angle, as the actual angle, and it's very obnoxious. People will say, well, you know what, I watch Fox News and I'm well informed. Well, I don't know, because it's just as statist as any other news outlet. It's controlled opposition more than anything. I mean, think about it. If the government is such a pervasive and all-controlling thing, why is Fox allowed to be such a huge news station? Because it's controlled opposition. It's blatant. It's obvious. But no one really wants to take that angle, because then that would be attacking the so-called bastion of conservative news, when in actuality it's really not. It's more like old school Democrat news when you think about it, because like going back into ancient history, back in the 1910s or so, Democrats are actually quite similar to today's Republicans. So there's not really a whole lot of difference between the two parties, if any at all. I mean, there's really not. That's kind of the funny thing, is any difference you see between the two parties is going to be marginal. It's going to be very marginal on a minor issue. Now, you might see an individual candidate who's going to push himself as, I'm a Tea Party this or that, but what does that mean anyway? There's no unified stance for a Tea Party anything, so there's no real telling what that could mean. I'm a Tea Party patriot who also believes in surveilling suspected terrorists, and that doesn't really work out. You know, it's people have freedom of speech, and they have freedom of privacy as well, no matter what they're suspected of. Suspicion doesn't mean jack. You got to have a warrant. That's the plain, clear, constitutional way of it. You got to get a warrant, and suspicion doesn't mean anything. You need a signed oath or affirmation, an affidavit of some sort. And if you don't get that, then you can't just search people's stuff. Well, you can, but you can't legally. That's the thing. People say you can't do this. Well, they can. They just can't do it legally. And nobody's going to enforce the law. This country is entirely lawless. There's no doubting that. This country is absolutely, entirely, and totally lawless when it comes to the governmental systems. Totally lawless. There's no doubting that. And any state is going to be, because states don't have to follow their own rules, or its own rules, I should say. A state does not follow its own rules. That's how they are from inception. That's just how it is. A state does not follow its own rules, but they enforce those rules against the populace. So the people end up being held down by the state, whereas the state does whatever it wants, collectively, of course. And that's the problem with states. So it's quite a bind that Feinstein has gotten herself into. Now she's entreating FCC Chair Tom Wheeler to assure providers that it isn't true. The Senate does acknowledge that there are laws against material support for terrorism, of course, and Title II only applies to legal web traffic. But nonetheless, there's apparently confusion among at least some broadband providers on whether they may take such actions in order to promote national security and law enforcement purposes. The argument is nonsense for at least 3 different reasons, says The Verge. For one, there's no current effort to wipe Inspire off the internet entirely, nor is it clear what those grounds would be. If law enforcement agencies do want to take down a network of sites as a result of criminal activity, there's a clear process for them to do so. In fact, this happens all the time. It's not a real problem facing law enforcement agencies, and even if it were, it has nothing at all to do with Title II. The same Title II regulations have applied to landline telephones for years, and that has not stopped cops from singling out specific phone numbers for wiretaps or more drastic measures, illegal measures, I might add. Fast lane or no, you can still pull someone over if you've got the evidence to justify it, and you have to have probable cause. You must have probable cause. You can't just pull somebody over for no good reason. Probable cause. That's the chief phrase that must be pushed as much as possible. Probable cause. Suspicion doesn't really mean jack. Yet again, I suspect my next door neighbor might be a member of the IRA, a well-known terrorist organization. This being the case, of course, I need to surveil his house. I need to use binoculars to look through his window. Doesn't really work that way. You have to have a oath affirmation. There has to be a signed warrant. All these different things have to be in place. Suspicion does not mean anything. In other words, according to this article, this is not about terrorism. It's about broadband providers doing whatever they can to throw a wrench in the FCC's net neutrality proposals. That also, it's not about terrorism. It's actually about just monitoring people's communications. That is so obvious. But again, when you watch the Fox or you watch CNN or you watch CNBC or MSNBC or whatever news organization you choose to watch, they're going to use terrorism as the angle, no matter what. That's what it's going to be about. That's the angle they're going to push. They're going to have whole huge arguments about terrorism, and that's going to be it. And you're not going to see the real story, because that's how the news works. At least that's how cable news works, and that's how TV news works. But that's not how I operate. And as a news director, that's not how I'm going to let this ship sail. You know what I mean? I'm the captain of this vessel when it comes to news, and we're going to push the real angle, which is, of course, it's not actually about terrorism. It's about control. quite obvious. But for some reason, again, the cable news stations are going to say, oh, it's terrorism. It's always about terrorism, especially because that's sort of the high horse, and that's the one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, it seems, is terrorism for some reason. And if we just jump on that angle, then we can pretty much talk about whatever we want so long as we create a clear and obvious link to terrorism. And it's really, really obnoxious when you keep seeing these news agencies do that. I hate it so much. But the only way to combat that is to call them out, and that's what I'm doing, because stop using terrorism as an excuse to get whatever you want done. It shouldn't work that way. Unfortunately, our Congress is really dumb and has been for hundreds of years, so that's just what we got to deal with. But there are ways to get around it, of course, which is to protect yourself in a concise manner. We'll put it that way. There are protections you can take, such as don't post stuff on the internet. You know, like there are actually measures you can take to not be looked at by the cops or by whatever intelligence agency you're worried about. Is just don't post stuff on the internet, right? I mean, you can have a grassroots movement or whatever, but don't post stuff on the internet if you're worried about the feds. I mean, that's the most obvious thing. And I'm not using that as a tip. I'm saying that's what they do. I mean, terrorists are not like a bunch of dumb people. They're going to do things in a smart way. After all, you know, things happen. You know, like terrorist attacks actually do happen, and they're not usually pulled off by really stupid people. So these guys know better than to post their stuff on the internet, right? And so the same goes for assassination attempts, same goes for pretty much any crime. Is a successful criminal is going to know not to post stuff on the internet, and it's simple as that, really. So unfortunately, the government is trying to control yet more aspects of our lives for total control of everything we ever do, so that there's only an illusion of freedom when really none exists. Well, have you heard about Soylent? I'm actually kind of excited about it, but I'm a little bit wary now because of what I've been hearing. Soylent, of course, is a food replacement. It's really interesting, too. What it does is, and of course, if you've seen the movie Soylent Green, you pretty much know exactly what it does. It's a food replacement. So you would drink this sort of like smoothie shake sort of thing. It's the same consistency as one, like a protein shake sort of. And that's all your nutrients and all your nutrition for like the whole day. And this one meal is contained in a shake. Not the tastiest way to get through your day, but it actually does work. Well, now a watchdog group says that Soylent's cadmium and lead levels actually violate California law. So apparently, if I'm remembering right in my elementary school chemistry, if there's high enough levels of cadmium and lead, you could actually use Soylent as a battery. But fortunately, there's probably not that high enough levels. Late last week, nonprofit environmental watchdog group As You Sow, oh, that's clever, issued a press release indicating its intention to file suit against the makers of Soylent. Yeah, the meal replacement product engineered by Silicon Valley entrepreneur Rob Reinhart. As You Sow, that's going to drive me nuts, states that two separately tested samples of Soylent's latest 1.5 formula contained 12 to 25 times the amount of lead allowed under the Safe Harbor for Reproductive Health provisions of the state of California's Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Environment Act of 1986, commonly known as Prop 65. As You Sow also says that it found cadmium levels at least 4 times higher than the Safe Harbor for reproductive health levels. Soylent already displays a Proposition 65 notice on its website. According to the information there, consuming a full day's worth of Soylent 1.5 would indeed exceed both the maximum allowable dose levels and no significant risk levels for lead and cadmium. California's Proposition 65 guidelines for heavy metals are more strict than those used internationally by the World Health Organization. The MADL and NSRL numbers for lead and cadmium aren't indicators of immediate harm. Rather, they are limits below which no harm has been observed. For example, the cadmium MADL is 4.1 UGs per day, and was computed by taking the lowest dosage level of cadmium that resulted in adverse reproductive effects in rats, dividing that level by 10, and then dividing that level by 1,000. Going by Soylent's numbers of 85.39 of cadmium in a full 4-serving bag of Soylent 1.5, that result in a number that exceeds MADL is still far below any level of observed effect. Similarly, the NSRL for lead is 15 UGs, I think, per day, and Soylent's level or data shows 24.95, I think UG is how you say it, in a 4-serving bag. So the press release from As You Sow seems to indicate that the levels of lead and cadmium found were higher than Soylent's published numbers, though it contains no specific measurements, which is kind of a problem. Ars Technica actually contacted As You Sow with different questions and a request for comment, but the organization had not responded as of press time. So it is possible to say that per the state of California's Prop 65 guidelines, Soylent requires extra labeling. The overriding question of is this dangerous is more difficult to answer. The levels here are for reproductive toxicity, which are much tighter than levels for poisoning or carcinogenic effects. As You Sow has raised similar lead and cadmium allegations against other companies, most recently in February against half a dozen chocolate makers, including Ghirardelli, Godiva, I think, Hershey, Lindt and Sprungili, Mondelez, and Earth Circle Organics. Ars Technica commented, this is a tough day for me. Ars Technica contacted Soylent for comment, and the company responded with this following statement. Soylent is completely safe and nutritious. Soylent ingredients and the complete formula meet or exceed product safety standards and federal requirements set forth by the FDA, and the World Health Organization, and are manufactured in FDA-approved facilities that follow federally regulated good manufacturing processes, or GMPs. Transparency with our customers and community is of the utmost importance, and as such, we display Proposition 65 warnings to customers in both California and across the United States and Canada. We stand by the quality and safety of our product. So does As You Sow have a lead here? Is there something to say about that? Well, maybe. It's kind of tough to tell, actually. But as it is, Soylent is a food replacement, and that sort of already suggests a bit of risk involved. And so higher lead and cadmium levels don't really mean a whole lot to me when it comes right down to it. Now, take from that what you will, though. If you're ever considering possibly buying Soylent as a food replacement, that's certainly something that could be and should be put into consideration, is that, there are higher levels of lead and cadmium than maybe you'd be comfortable with. But hey, I mean, that's just how it be, right? That's just how it is. And if you're not comfortable with that, hey, you can make the consumer choice to not buy this product. So you should be informed as a customer, and you should make your own choices. So take that information as you will and go with that. So it's kind of interesting to see what the ramifications there may be from taking a food replacement instead of just, eating as God intended. Still, it's interesting anyway. Well, you might be familiar with AT&T. If you're not, I don't know where you're from, but AT&T is, of course, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company. It also hasn't actually been called the American Telephone and Telegraph Company for something like 50 or 60 years. I'm amazed I actually know that AT&T stands for American Telephone and Telegraph. But anyway, AT&T has been the provider for cell phones for years and years now, and sort of had a monopoly back in the Bell days. And then it got split up into all the baby Bells, and Verizon sprung out of it. And you had Bell South, you had Quest, you had Bell Canada, which is still in operation, by the way. Bell Canada is still a thing. Kind of interesting. But all these different organizations sprung from the AT&T monopoly back in the day, and now you have all sorts of different companies that has sprung up. And actually, pretty much all the different phone companies we have today in terms of cell phones, basically everyone who works for them on the higher up level used to work for Bell, which is kind of funny. But anyway, a unique and unusually productive relationship with AT&T has helped the U.S. National Security Agency trawl through vast quantities of internet traffic, much of it transmitted through networks located in the U.S., according to a media article published on Saturday. The cooperation involved a variety of classified programs that spans decades, in one case more than 15 years before the September 11th terrorist attacks, in case you hadn't heard of those. In addition to providing the NSA, again, that's the National Security Agency, with access to billions of emails flowing across its domestic networks, AT&T helped to wiretap all internet communications at the United Nations headquarters, which is, or at least was, an AT&T customer, according to the article, which was jointly reported and written by reporters from the New York Times and ProPublica. Now, here's where it gets kind of funny is, don't think you're safe if you use a different carrier other than AT&T, because you're not. A phone company would not be allowed to exist. There'd be some scandal that would spring up here in the States if it wasn't working very closely with the NSA, again, the National Security Agency. Have you noticed that you can throw in the word national security, or the phrase, I should say, national security into pretty much anything and get away with whatever you want. It's kind of like defense. If you throw defense into any agency, suddenly it's okay. Kind of like the IDF, just throw in defense and suddenly anything we do is okay. So national security is the big thing now. It's the big buzz phrase, where if we just throw in the word, or phrase, I should say, national security, then suddenly it's okay. You can literally get away with murder so long as it's for national security purposes. You can bomb whoever the heck you want so long as it's for national security purposes. Hey, man, you can spy on whoever you want. National security. That's the big thing. So just throw in that phrase. So, like, if I'm breaking into a bunch of cars and a cop stops me, I could say, whoa, 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 step back. This is for national security purposes. And suddenly it'll be okay. I can rob a store. Hey, whoa, 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 whoa. Don't try to stop me. This is for national security purposes. And the store owner will put down his gun and say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Go ahead, search my register. Oh, wait, no, I probably wouldn't be able to get away with that, but the state can. Anyway, one of the oldest programs that AT&T has is dubbed Fairview, and it began back in 1985. A separate program known as Storm Brew included both Verizon and MCI. Of course, MCI is no longer around. The former telecommunications provider that Verizon acquired back in 2006. The New York Times and ProPublica go on to paint AT&T as a particularly willing partner with the National Security Agency. So this is not the first time that AT&T has been accused of playing a crucial role in indiscriminate NSA surveillance involving U.S. persons. Back in 2006, retired AT&T technician Mark Klein alleged in a federal lawsuit that he had seen the NSA equipment installed in a secret room inside a San Francisco central office that AT&T used to route internet communications. Klein said that AT&T was giving the NSA access to traffic AT&T had transmitted through peering agreements with other telecom companies. So the NSA is kind of a dubious and shady organization, and has been since its inception back in the 60s. Of course, we couldn't know that the NSA existed until like the 90s or 80s. So it gets to be like the farther down the rabbit hole you go, the just more twisted things get. Like, we think that we're somewhat safe with our communications, and then it just turns out that we're absolutely not, so long as the National Security Agency is involved. Because it's been proven, actually, by different studies that the government itself has done, that the National Security Agency doesn't actually stop any terrorist attacks. So why do we tolerate its existence anyway? It's an illegal entity, so why do we tolerate that it still exists? Because status quo is cool, right? I mean, think about it. If there is some major change in the United States, then people will go nuts. Everything has to be gradual, and everything has been gradual. That's how we got up to this point. So if suddenly things changed and there was a massive purge of all these illegal entities, people wouldn't know what to do, or at least people think they wouldn't know what to do. Think about it this way. Like with the healthcare system that we have here in the United States, nobody is going to fix it. That's the thing that has to be understood immediately. Nobody's going to come in on their shining white horse and say, hey, I'm going to get rid of the healthcare system as it is. That's not going to happen, no matter what the candidate promises. It's not going to happen. Nobody can do that. Well, nobody, rather, will do that, I should say. There's too much money being made off of it. And plus, nobody has a concise plan to fix it. It's kind of like immigration. Nobody has a concise plan to so-called fix the immigration so-called problem. Nobody has a plan for that, except for Trump, and his plan is kind of crazy, and it's never going to work. So there's not any plan to fix much of anything. We are on a downward spiral. There's no fixing it, and that's okay. You see, people think when I talk about the downward spiral and the collapse of the American system that this is a doom and gloom scenario, but it's actually not, because it's a chance for the state to kind of go away and for the people to take over, because the people have all the power in the world. We just need to use it. That's the thing. We have all this power and we don't actually use it. We need to start exercising our rights. We have them. God gave them to us. So why don't we use them more often? Because we're duped into thinking we can't.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing about
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Costa, host of the Costa Report, every Sunday at 9 a.m. My guest this week was the former U.S. ambassador to Russia and special assistant to President Obama, Mr. Michael McFaul. He'll be here to separate fact from fiction when it comes to Putin's aspirations for Russia. Don't miss Ambassador Michael McFaul this Sunday at 9 a.m. on the Costa Report, right here on WSDT AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
Here you are, working to keep your customers happy and to manage your cash flow. IRS problems are the last thing you need, but here they are, flapping about you like vultures. Get help from Eric Pelton and his team of accountants at E.J. Pelton Company. Audits, letters, proposed return changes, 1099s, penalty threats. Pelton Tax Resolution Services brings peace of mind and helps you keep more of what you've earned. EJPelton.com. Offices on Brainerd Road and in Saudi Daisy, just north of the Bilo. That's EJ Pelton. Call 622-3156. Think ahead. 622-3156.
Arnie Guest Goldsmith, Chattanooga's gold standard in quality, selection, and beautifully handcrafted jewelry. Arnie Guest Goldsmith has 7 jewelers on site and ready to assist you in the design of your one-of-a-kind diamond piece. Arnie Guest Goldsmith, Chattanooga's gold standard in quality, selection, and beautifully handcrafted jewelry. Arnie Guest Goldsmith has 7 jewelers on site and ready to assist you in the design of your one-of-a-kind diamond piece to the perfect, affordable handcrafted gem. From just $20 silver earrings to your dream elegant work of art to adorn your finger, neck, and wrists, impressing your friends and family, Arnie Guest Goldsmith will ensure that your budget is met. Planning the perfect wedding or a special event? Then let Arnie Guest Goldsmith assist you in choosing or designing the keepsake that will last you a lifetime. All of Arnie Guest Goldsmith repairs and crafting are done in-house, so you can be rest assured that it will meet or exceed your expectations. For over 30 years, Arnie Guest Goldsmith has served Chattanooga with the finest jewelry and services, meeting only the highest quality and standards. So the next time you think of jewelry, custom design, remounting, appraisals, or repairs, remember Arnie Guest Goldsmith. And please visit Arnie